Hello. Today will be another one of these, I guess, slightly more rambly videos. I guess people liked the previous one, so I thought I'd do another one. And this time, I want to discuss a interesting occurrence that just took place in the United States, which is the fact that Zohran Mamdani won the mayoral election in New York City, and what that means and what that could have in store for the future of quote-unquote radical politics in a place such as the imperial metropole that is the United States. A few things before people think I'm coming off with an ultra take. He won, that's pretty cool, that's objectively a good thing, but not for the reasons that you might think, right? He campaigned, and it was a fairly well-written campaign actually, comparatively for American standards, American electoral standards, I mean. It actually had reasonable ideas, and it was presented in a fairly understandable way, especially for like lay people, I guess, or people wouldn't be too interested to read too deeply about it. The questions of funding and whatnot, which have been beaten to death, about the free buses, quote-unquote free buses or subsidized buses, as well as the grocery stores that are somewhat subsidized, amongst other things. It was well presented, right? Thing is, the fact that he won is good in the same way that the Bernie wave was good, in that it will eventually help push people, hopefully, slightly more left, or get them to read, get them to be eventually disillusioned by the nature of this reformist or electoral takes. He most likely will improve the lives of some New York citizens or Americans. I don't know if you'd call them New York citizens, you know what I mean. He most likely will improve the lives of some Americans in the city of New York. The thing is that the extent of that change in quality of life and the subsequent developments from it are limited. First, something that I think it's missed a bit from the dialogue is he kind of followed a bit of an Obama playbook, not in the same way, right? But a similar way. Obama followed what was kind of quote-unquote progressive of the era and presented himself as young and relatively hip and whatnot. Zohran is doing the same thing. I don't think he's disingenuous, but he is doing the same thing. He's presenting himself as fairly hip. There's if you follow any of his social media pages, then it's very nicely curated and presented for a younger audience. But one thing that he did ride was the anti-Zionist wave, which is very not popular. It's the norm in the States and worldwide, really, aside from the ruling cliques everywhere. And the big worry there is that I'm not so sure he's going to return that favor to the current struggle of the Palestinians, or even to curb supreme censorship or surveillance of pro-Palestine activists or other sort of like Palestine action that's going on in the States or in New York, wherever else. He doesn't have much impact outside of the city of New York, but you understand what I mean. I don't think that he's going to do much for it. I'll mention why in a second. It has to do with who was funding him and who kind of stands behind him, for better or worse. Thing is, when it comes to bourgeois elections, bourgeois as in the United States is a capitalist, it's a dictatorship of the capitalist class. The state exists just to manage the affairs of various sections of the ruling class, in this case, those who own capital, who own everything. And that's no different when it comes to these local elections, which, by the way, the turnout for them is fairly inconsequential. This is not some victory of democracy or what have you. Still, it is good to see it happen, but that's not something that is not a
harbinger
of way more positive change to come on the like national level in the States. But the point that I'm trying to get at is bourgeois elections, by their nature, exist to prevent progressive or revolutionary change. They exist to maintain the status quo, particularly the right to own property, to manage it as you will, and for the richest sectors of the ruling class to continuously gobble up as much property and capital as they possibly can, to bring it under further centralization, to the detriment and the immiseration of the vast majority of the population, which is what has been happening in the States since the 70s at least, and in the rest of the world since even before, and most of the world since forever. Just because he won this election does not change the fact that in these cycles, whatever one guy does, the next guy who comes in after 4 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 12 years, doesn't matter, will be supported by various other interests, which will leverage discontent about the current figure. For example, Zohran, I'm talking 15 years from now, any positive change that he might bring in, anything that he does that would be wrong will be leveraged to then push forward and like a right-wing alternative, and they'll force him through in some way or another. It's just that Cuomo was so massively unpopular that's why he lost.
If there was a ranked choice election, how would you vote, Mr. Mamdani?
If there was a ranked choice election?
In this. You'd have to rank these.
Myself number 1 and Curtis number 2.
Mr. Sliwa.
Oh, please don't be glazing me here, Zohran.
Amongst many other reasons. Back to the video in just a minute. Let's hear from today's sponsor, Incogni. Most people don't realize it, but their personal information is already scattered across the internet. Data brokers and people search sites collect everything: your home address, phone number, relatives' names, even court records, and publish or sell it without your consent. This information being online for all to see exposes you to various dangers such as scams, identity theft, online harassment, and stalking. Criminals have used stolen personal data to take out loans in other people's names. Even employers or insurers might buy this information to make decisions that affect your future. Once your data is out there, it doesn't just sit still. It gets copied, resold, and spread across countless sites. Trying to clean it up manually could take hundreds of hours. That's where Incogni comes in. They do the hard work for you by contacting hundreds of data brokers directly and demanding your information be removed. Their system keeps following up too, making sure your data doesn't just pop back up. And with their custom removals feature, you can send them any specific link where your information is exposed, and their team will handle it. And for my viewers, you can get a massive 60% discount on an annual Incogni plan using my link and the code HAKIM. Getting started is simple. You just create an account, you authorize Incogni to act on your behalf, and you sit back while they track down your data and work to remove it. They even send you progress updates so you always know what's happening. So what are you waiting for? Click my link in the description, use the code HAKIM, and get your 60% off an annual Incogni plan and start protecting your data today. Thanks to Incogni for the sponsorship. This allows me to pay my editor fairly, which is much appreciated. Alright, back to the video. But that will result in eventually pulling back of all the quote-unquote positive change that he brought. At least that's what's happened in every other election. Look at the quote-unquote pink wave in Latin America. You have some like center left to actually kind of left, but still within electoral barriers. Political party coming into power in various Latin American countries. They put in some positive change for a while, but the second they lose because of, a downturn in the world economy that results poverty at home that they can't change because they have IMF debt that they're tied to, that they can't get out of as a government because of the way that their legislature is set up, or whatever other reasons. As a result, the right wing of said country, Latin American country, leverages that discontent to push forward their right-wing candidate, which wins in the subsequent election, and then just pulls back everything that those of the pink wave put in, all the positive change, pro-quote-unquote pro-people change that happened. And that most likely will happen here. And of course, by its very nature, because it's not a nation, it's a city, it's far more limited. Another thing is likability. Just him being hip and, knows how to talk and knows the memes and whatnot, that's not what makes socialism. Socialism is a grassroots organization. That's one part. And another, it's a group of professional revolutionaries that learn, and these are the most educated or most militant members of the working class, that learn how to harness the discontents of the population to put forward a party program that's actually popular, that then subsequently enters through various modes. It could be through dual power, it could be partly through elections, not entirely, of course, that's very limited, but there's some progress that can be made there, so on and so forth. But one guy loosely at the head of a very disjointed quote-unquote movement, like Bernie, for example, right, cannot instate socialism. You can't make any significant shifts in any socioeconomic system with these superficial, within the system shifts. We covered this in 2 episodes. If you want to see a historical example of this being successful on a nationwide stage, meaning a socialist leader comes to power and then fails in whatever he's trying to do because the nature of the state prevents that change that he wants to put forth from actually taking place. We did a recent episode on the program about Allende in Chile, and specifically about Pinochet. And another one was we did an episode about Zohran Mamdani. We spoke about exactly what would happen in the end, which is one is cautiously optimistic, but very limited in what he'll be able to actually achieve. And that kind of leads to the point that any positive attempts at making quote-unquote pro-people changes will be most likely blocked or will be heavily limited or neutered because he's not alone. New York City is the home of capital historically, right? You have so many significant entrenched influences that he has to kind of pander to, and as a result will have to blunt his message or his attempt to improve things for the vast majority of people. That's why, for example, he's made statements about supporting police, not defunding them, right? That's why he's kind of went back a little bit on some of the anti-Zionist stuff, actually kind of leaning towards the other side. That's why he's limited the sharper edges of some of the economic policy that he's trying to put in, and limited to very, lukewarm social democrat changes, which is very in line with the, labor aristocrat nation that is the United States. Of course, not the entire American population is a labor aristocracy, but there's a significant portion of them, and a good portion of them are regular quote-unquote professional people in New York. I'm not talking about the person who washes dishes in some restaurant. I'm talking about, managerial staff for the most part of the, demographic or ethnic quote-unquote majority that's favored in the States, meaning specifically white people. These people are labor aristocrats. Their interests don't lie with the general interests of the worldwide working class. It's with their very narrow slither of the gains of imperialism that they get to keep for themselves. That's also a reason why the vast majority of more substantial left-wing change has never really taken place in the States or in these quote-unquote Western nations, the imperial core, I mean. Moreover, and this is something interesting, I did not know this actually, that the people who have funded, and of course, this is not because he is evil or something, it's very expensive to run a campaign in the States. That's kind of by design. So you have to reach out and you have to get funding from larger institutions, private companies and whatnot, or individuals who have their own interests that you're going to have to serve. That's by design. And one of the groups that he's had to that he's going to have to pander to are people who supported him. There is, of course, weapons industry grants or donations like Lockheed Martin. There's various governors or House of Representatives members that are either like hyper-Zionists or people who have had particular stances that are anti-worker association, anti-unionization, whatnot. You have people who lead other capital or hedge fund management groups. Now, of course, that's not his fault, right? He can't really do anything about that. But that is a very noticeable thing that's going to blunt his attempts to do anything more substantial, because he has to assuage these donors of his. And the likely result of this is probably, at the end of the day, he'll be another Bernie who took many years to say that there's a genocide happening, where we all know it's happening. Jesus Christ. Or he's going to be another AOC, or he's going to be another one of these many American like left liberals who in the end they talk a big game, but they can't actually put any sort of change aside from reformist promises that don't ever really get anywhere. I remember reading a quote to the tune of him saying, Zohran saying that he wouldn't be defunding police, that he's not running to defend the police, that, I've been very clear that they're very important for public safety, that they have a critical role in improving public safety, so on and so forth, maintaining their funding and whatnot. He even mentioned that he would have Zionists in his administration, which is very sus, right? He has been very clear in his quote-unquote condemnations of Venezuela and Cuba. He declared Miguel Diaz-Canel and Maduro, so the leaders of Venezuela and Cuba, as dictators, despite the fact that I remember the quote: their administrations have stifled free and fair elections, jailed political opponents, and suppressed the free and fair press. My guy, you live in the States, all right? I'm not gonna get into I have videos on Cuba that you can watch if you're really interested in all this. The point of what I'm getting at is the end stage of this will be not souring, but like another Bernie wave eventually, where people will wake up to realize, well, not wake up, hopefully they will come to realize that, hey, when you have reformist promises that are beholden to so many other moneyed and entrenched interests, you won't be able to carry them through. So you'll have to blunt your message, and you're going to have to kind of, quote unquote, meet in the middle. And as a result, you end up with just more, center-left nonsense, where it's kind of like slight improvement of some people's quality of life, but the general trajectory will continue to be, further centralization of capital. It will still be like the top 0.1% of New Yorkers buying the vast majority of the homes, owning most of the businesses, owning the most capital, and nothing will affect this. The actual economic base of society won't change, aside from, I guess more like ethnic diversity and political representation. This liberal stuff, right? That at the end of the day doesn't get to the crux of the matter. I'm not saying it's bad, of course. There's good things in all of this, but when you don't get at the economic base, you don't really get anywhere. And finally, the future of revolution in the States. I've spoken about this. I have a video on reformism that I'm going to put up on the screen here that I think is very important. The future of quote-unquote revolution is not, I don't want to say bleak. The United States is not the place where revolution will take place. When you have a system such as the modern capitalist system, which has divided the world so starkly into the imperial periphery and imperial core, you have more concentrated and more severe forms of class struggle taking place in the imperial periphery, where there is much more clear signs of friction and labor struggles and whatnot, which will eventually result in some sort of positive change, of course, through the tireless efforts of labor movements in these countries in the imperial periphery. And as a result of that, eventually socialist change will take place there, like actual socialist change, revolutionary change, like what was historically happened in Indonesia, for example, before the United States came and started killing hundreds of thousands of people. That's what I mean, though, that kind of change, which will then cut out a lot of these entrenched interests and owners and movers of capital from these imperial periphery countries, which will result in the class struggle becoming more heightened, even at home. And as a result, then the interests of the quote-unquote working class in the States, for example. Again, not all of the working class in the States. There's various levels to this. I've made videos on this. I'm generalizing here just to help with the understanding of what the future might look like. The working class in the States, the labor aristocratic part of it at least, will then subsequently be subjected to a more heightened form of class struggle. And as a result of that heightened form of class struggle, you will end up with more militant movements, actually militant movements that will push attempts towards revolution that might actually get somewhere. But that requires the revolutionary change to happen abroad first. That means at home, if you live in a imperial core country, the most important thing is to prep, to read, to organize, to agitate, to try to support these imperial periphery movements, be they in Cuba or Venezuela or wherever else, to support these labor struggles, because in the end, their victory will be your victory, because that's what will allow actual positive change to take place, because that's what will heighten the class struggle. Otherwise, at the end, there's going to be a reduction of quality of life in the imperial core regardless. It'll either happen because of decentralization of capital and it's the tendency for the rate of profit to fall, which I've made videos about here, or it will happen because revolutionary change happens abroad that will improve the lives of many, many millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people in the imperial periphery, which will then subsequently allow you in your country with your organizations and your labor struggles to emerge victorious. And then as a result of that, you'll be able to maintain or develop sustainable change, not one based on the whims of Lockheed Martin donations to an election. All right, so the general gist of this is read, continue to be part of organizations, agitate and organize, try to support labor struggles abroad, and try to be optimistic. Hopefully Zohran will be a good thing for New York City, and hopefully his example will only proliferate amongst the various states, and hopefully that will also allow for a more calm environment to properly organize and will reduce persecution or surveillance or whatnot. I don't have high hopes for it, but let's hope. And let's hope he also improves the quality of life of the poorest New Yorkers, and that example also proliferate amongst the states, because at the end of the day, that's what socialism is about, improving the quality of life of people. But that needs to be done within the frame of course, changing socioeconomic systems and conditions, right? You can't do it when private property still exists. Right now, it's been done away with, to quote Marx, or paraphrase him, for 9/10 of the population. We just need to get rid of that last 10th, and we need to do that in various creative ways that we might get into in a future episode or discussion. Yeah, those are my thoughts on what's happening. I would love to hear what you guys think. If you enjoy what I do, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help. I'd like to thank my patrons, so thank you too.